Okay, welcome everyone. I am Sheila Budoff. I am with Arlington County's Office of 55 Plus Programs, and I would like to welcome you to this program, the Harvey Girls Tame the West. This is one of my all-time favorite topics, and as you can see, I got into the spirit of it. I am dressed as a Harvey girl. See, I even have my black bow on like the Harvey Girls in the picture. I'm really glad you could join us for this one. This program was highlighted in the 55 Plus e-newsletter as one of our features for Women's History Month. And I was a little surprised at that, but then I realized that actually that was very appropriate. That was a very fitting choice because the Harvey Girls were one of the first all-female workforces. They were very brave, independent, and adventurous women who left their safe homes back east to try something new. They were pioneers in their own right. And this was at a time when women didn't travel alone, and they most often did not work outside of the home. The Harvey Girls were a part of Fred Harvey's vision of providing good food and lodging along the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad out west. And as the railroads extended into new territory and long-distance train travel for business and tourism became more popular, Fred Harvey was the founder of the hospitality industry, quite frankly, and the Harvey Girls helped bring luxury and hospitality to the West, one good meal at a time. Fred Harvey was the Ray Kroc of the food industry, the founder of McDonald's, and the J.W. Marriott of the lodging industry. He created the first food and lodging chains with uniform, high-quality standards. Fred Harvey and the Harvey houses were also very popular with tourists at the national park, especially the Grand Canyon, where the Grand Canyon Railway Station and the El Tovar Hotel still stand. Thanks to Zoom and the miracles of modern technology, we have with us today a national park ranger all the way from the Grand Canyon National Park to share the fascinating history of the Harvey Girls. Ranger Suzanne is an education technician at the Grand Canyon National Park, where she works primarily with student groups to encourage stewardship of public lands. Before that, Suzanne worked at Big Hole National Battlefield in Montana and Cuyahoga Valley National Park in Ohio doing similar work. We're going to hold questions until the end. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go, and we will try to address as many of them as possible. We're delighted for them. Or if you just want to unmute yourselves at the end and ask your question, that is fine too. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ranger Suzanne. And again, I'm going to spotlight her so that your images are not going to show.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ranger Suzanne, as mentioned, and today I'll be chatting about the Harvey Girls here, specifically at the Grand Canyon. To orient you guys a little bit, I am calling in from the Grand Canyon. As you can tell, I'm indoors, but I am lucky enough to be here pretty close to the rim in our distance learning studio. Now we're focusing in on the Harvey Girls today, but I do like to acknowledge that the Harvey Girls, or Fred Harvey, are not the first people to have discovered this land. In fact, it's a bit misleading to say that anybody discovered this land, as people have been here for over 12,000 years, according to the archaeological record, and since time immemorial, according to oral histories. So while the Harvey Girls are very important for the European American settler experience here at the Grand Canyon, there are many, many people that came before them who lived here, cooked food here, spent time with their families, recreated, and held a very special place in their heart for this land that we now know as the Grand Canyon. Now, to understand the Harvey Girls, we have to know who Fred Harvey is, the guy who they're named after. And as was mentioned at the top, Fred Harvey was a very important person in the hospitality industry. Specifically here at the Grand Canyon, his hospitality efforts were really assisted by the railroad coming up to the canyon. So in 1901, a railway line was finished that connected Williams, Arizona, which is about an hour drive today south of here, up to the canyon. And that really increased tourism here at the south rim of the canyon. The Fred Harvey Company built and ran many of the restaurants, hotels, and various visitor amenities located here at the canyon throughout the 20th century. And him and his company, they really prided themselves on being equal opportunity employers. Harvey was quoted as saying, "Real service is without discrimination." And we'll learn a bit more about that with the Harvey Girls today. So the Harvey Girls were part of the hotel and restaurant staff, and they were considered by many the first workforce made up of all women in the United States. Eva Fuqua remembers she was 17 years old and had never been over 50 miles away from home. There were no jobs where I lived. It was the smartest thing I think that I could have done at the time, to move to the Grand Canyon and become a Harvey Girl. Women came from all over the country to work with the company, and they were famous for providing truly impeccable service. They really prided themselves on just the utmost service and always being clean and timely and doing everything they could for their guests. Employees would be provided room and board, and women had to follow strict curfews as well as strict protocols for how they were allowed to act at the time. So while men maybe had a bit more freedoms, these Harvey Girls, who, despite being called girls, they really were women, they had more restrictions on them, which makes sense when you consider the time. Even though they did have some restrictions while they were here, becoming a Harvey Girl was an excellent way for them to gain independence. Irene Armstrong remembers it was unheard of for a woman to go that far away from home. Most of these girls had never been away from home. It was kind of scary, but I like to say it was in the middle of the Depression, and if you had a job, you were lucky. So the Harvey Girls, the employment provided by Fred Harvey was really important for them to not only have a job, but to get away from home, to see a new part of the United States, and was fundamental for their freedom. During the Great Depression, many, many women took the opportunity to come work for Fred Harvey and then send money home as well, so to help support their families. Zeta Sharon says, women were just trapped in the worlds they lived in because they had no independence. Financial independence didn't exist. And as you'll notice throughout this program, I'll have a fair number of quotes because I think it's really valuable to hear as best we can from those people who lived at this time. So I hope you don't mind quotes because I got a lot of them. Now, the work environment at the Fred Harvey Company here at the Grand Canyon was fondly remembered as being really positive. So Dorothy Hunt talks here on the screen about how she worked at Bright Angel Lodge for 12 years. And she says, they were so nice to you. They made you feel like you really belonged to a family. It was really an excellent place to work. And again, those themes of independence, that community, having all of these women around you, to be able to all work together, all navigate that independence for the first time, perhaps, gain both, physical independence, being away from home, as well as financial, were really, at times, like was mentioned, perhaps scary, but also really meaningful and presented an excellent opportunity for these women to grow, both personally and professionally. People even found love here at the Grand Canyon. One Harvey girl, Edna Lemons, she met and married Roy Lemons, who also worked here at the Grand Canyon. working, putting in railroads as well as phone lines around the area. Edna Lemon said that we met the day I arrived. We went to the Bright Angel. We were looking around. There was a dance, and he was there with a friend. His or Roy's friend told me later that he said, "See that dark brunette gal? If I like her personality as much as I like her looks, I'm going to spend the rest of my life with her." Here we are 56 years later. Both Roy and Edna are buried here in the Grand Canyon Cemetery, and they're a classic love story of the time. Now, there were an incredible amount of opportunities presented by being a Harvey girl. That is absolutely undeniable. However, not everyone was afforded the same opportunities. The reality is that pretty much all of the front of house Harvey girls were white women that were being hired. So, for example, jobs such as waitresses and other people that would face-to-face interact with the visitors were only white. And oftentimes back of house operations such as laundresses, those were where you would find Hispanic folks, indigenous folks working, but there was definitely that divide going on. And this is especially interesting to note when you remember that we're not in Europe, we're not in a place where there are predominantly white people here. This is the Southwest, where Hispanic and indigenous women make up a large part of the population, and they did in the early 1900s as well, when the Harvey girls were truly in their heyday. But there was still very little recruitment to hire these women who were from this area and knew this land. However, these hiring practices were forced to change in World War II when labor shortages started to come around. Lucy Delgadillo Moore remembers her time here as a Harvey girl. And she says, "Harvey picked all the girls from the East, some from Europe, when they got to Santa Fe, New Mexico. There were no more blonde girls, tall blonde girls to his specifications. So he met his first Hispanic and Native American girls. During the war, they needed people. They didn't want to hire me. They had to. I was delighted to be a Harvey girl. I was there, I was Hispanic, and I love who I am. I knew who I am, what I am, and why. I love who I am. And I explained nothing. I just went to work, and my work showed the fruits of my life. It was a fantastic period." So even though these women, these Hispanic and Native American women, were really only hired out of necessity, that necessity did force a change in the culture, which is certainly valuable. Lucy would likely not have had the same opportunities had these labor shortages not come around. And it's unfortunate, again, that Fred Harvey's hand was forced in this matter. But at the same time, it's good that that change happened. The Fred Harvey Company also began hiring women from the Hopi, Zuni, and Navajo communities around this time. Some of them left the reservation when they were young, looking for work, and found their way here. Olive Monogye, a Hopi woman, worked as a Harvey girl for 30 years, and here's a quote from her. "We would be rushing around when the train was coming. We would hear the whistle, and we would run around. The train stopped, and all the people would come out, and it would be so crowded, and it was always nice. Everybody was happy. I worked hard over there and for a long time." So Olive here is fondly remembering her days, as are most quotes that you do end up finding from Harvey Girls are of those fond memories. I really like this quote because although Olive was of a different time, and I'm sure the Grand Canyon and the building, well, the Grand Canyon looks the same, but the buildings probably looked a lot different. The visitors look different. It still reminds me of the hustle and bustle we get today around spring break and in the summer when there are so many people, when the train comes in from Williams and you get almost 1,000 people coming off that train. It's crowded and crazy, but everyone's just happy to be there. So I like how that still holds true today. Working as a woman of color during that time was not always easy, though. There were some instances where these women definitely faced discrimination. And Hilda Salas remembers that. She says, I was a Harvey girl from 1939 to 1945. I learned to do a lot of things that I would never have learned before. I enjoyed the people that went there. They asked a lot of questions because I was Hispanic with dark hair and dark eyes, and most of the women who worked there were fair, blue eyes, so I was kind of an attraction. They asked what nationality I was, how come I could speak Spanish and English, and I guess that interests them. At first, I was nervous about it, but I learned to just keep going. So again, Hilda is remembering that she enjoyed her time, but she did certainly also face challenges during that period. Despite all of these challenges, it's undeniable, again, that there was upward mobility opportunity here. Hilda again says, since I was a waitress, I'd get tips and I saved my money. I was the first one in the family that opened a bank account. I had enough money when we came here to California to give a down payment on a house. And that is huge, especially if we're remembering this is like the 1930s, 1940s that we're thinking of. For women to have that financial independence, to not be reliant on a man to have a house, to feed themselves, to survive, was huge. And those opportunities afforded by Fred Harvey and the Fred Harvey Company are absolutely not to be forgotten. Zeta Sharon will close us out with a quote. She says, I'm glad I was a Harvey girl. The most important thing in the whole story of the Harvey Girls is the fact it gave women a chance to move out of the lives they were locked into and to be able to be a bit adventuresome. So these women had this tremendous opportunity, and those that did jump on it, like Zeta says, were probably the adventurous type to move all the way out to the Grand Canyon in a place that is still really remote. And nowadays we have luxuries such as most people having cars, and we have internet and things like that. And it's still a really remote place up here at the canyon. So I can only imagine what it would have been like for them leaving behind what they knew. Now, of course, not everyone was leaving behind what they knew. Some of those Hopi and Zuni and Navajo people, women had been in this area since time immemorial, and they were familiar with the Grand Canyon. And this just gave an opportunity for them to support themselves while still staying close to home. While others, kind of like myself, I'm originally from the East Coast, and I had opportunity to work at the Grand Canyon. I probably never would have lived in Arizona if not for the job that I had. So I can definitely relate to the opportunity that these Harvey girls were afforded. Now, that's all I have for my presentation, but I would love to answer any questions or chat, any comments that you guys have. Like was said, I'll open up the chat, I'll read through that, and then we can also just unmute for that.
Okay, thank you so much, Ranger Suzanne. That was fabulous, and I love the pictures. I'm wondering, well, let me first check and see, do we have any questions? Yes, Tom's got his hand up. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for that interesting presentation. I have a question about the wage, the hourly wage or the monthly wage, whatever it was, in comparison to sort of the average wage of a male worker. I mean, it's wonderful that opportunities were provided. It seems very progressive for its time. But I just wonder how much, did a typical woman earn as a Harvey girl compared to something?
That's a great question. And I actually don't have that number off the top of my head, but I would imagine it would be less. Do you know, Sheila?
Yeah, they made in the money of the time, they made $17.50 something per month, which is equivalent to about $388 per month. Plus they got room and board and travel. So it was a good wage. I don't know, since he didn't have male waiters as of about 1883, they switched over. He they used to have Black waiters and men generally, but there was so much discrimination against them. They had to carry guns to avoid being harassed, because it really was the wild, wild west or southwest. And it's at some point it was still, I mean, west was a relative term, but that was one of the reasons why they chose to hire women. And so I don't know the comparison to a male wage, but it was a good wage, certainly something they could live on, save money, send money home. And as Ranger Suzanne said, there was one woman who put a down payment down on a house. I mean, all of their expenses basically were taken care of, and one too many places to go there and things to do. So, you know, it was a livable wage and they could put some money aside.
Yeah, okay.
And I do know that the Civilian Conservation Corps, which were made up of men, and they did a lot of trail work, for example, they made $30 a month. So even though the Harvey Girls were certainly able to live off that wage, like you're saying, that's a fair chunk less than what the CCC was making.
Almost twice. Almost half of what the men were making. The men made about half. I mean, twice as much. Yeah. Well, yeah.
It
But
still was.
Sorry.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I mean, I'm not surprised that the women made a little less than men. I think they still do. If you look at you know, wage averages in the United States, but there was a tremendous opportunity for so many women. It sounds like it wouldn't have had any opportunity but for this.
Yeah, and I think they were treated well. I think that was part of the concept of the Harvey Girls, was that they were treated fairly and they were treated well, and it was considered an honor to be a Harvey Girl. You know, you had to meet certain specifications. They didn't hire just anyone. You had to be of good character. You had to be a certain age. You had to have the equivalent of a high school education. And then, you know, it was an honor. And then every year that they worked, they got a pin so that they felt loyal to the company, and they felt that they were valued. So we have another hand up. Judith Collins has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. Can you tell us a little more about Fred Harvey and his company? And did he have other locations where with Harvey Girls and other, you know, other kinds of things that he did in different other parts of the country?
Yeah, so he had a lot of different hotels. They are called the Harvey houses, and a lot of them were located along the Santa Fe rail line. There were quite a few, as well as in other spots. I believe there were a few in other national park sites as well. So yes, definitely not just limited to the Grand Canyon. He had a far-reaching hand, we'll say.
Absolutely. The idea was to have depots along the railway line, because railroad travelers, it took days to go. It took a long time, and you could only pack so much food for a train trip. So there were depots along the way, and you would get a half an hour to eat a meal at a depot restaurant by the side of at the train station. So there were lots of them at the peak. The company had 55 lunchrooms, 40 sit-down dining rooms, which was fancier. And the company ran 25 hotels. They had terminal restaurants at the various major railway terminals in Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City, Houston, Galveston, Wichita, Los Angeles, and Cleveland. So it was a major, major, major operation.
Thank you. That's very interesting.
I don't see anything in the chat. Anybody else with a question? I'll jump in with a question. Can you tell us a little bit about the El Tovar Hotel and at the Grand Canyon, what it was like and where it's situated?
Yeah, so the El Tovar Hotel, it still stands today. It's located on the east end of the village, about, I'd say like 20, 30 feet from the canyon edge itself. Mary Coulter is the woman who designed the interior of this hotel. And this is noteworthy. Another appropriate mention for Women's History Month. Mary Coulter was an architect in the early 1900s who built, I think, about 6 or 7 buildings here on the South Rim, or designed, I should say. She has a very interesting story because being a female architect was basically unheard of at that time. And she actually received a lot of pushback from the men who were working under her. So she would, I've heard stories of, for example, when she was building one building that had a lot of stonework on the outside, she knew exactly how she wanted it to look. And she directed the men who were working to, place the rocks in a very specific way. And then she went home and she wasn't on the work site for a few days. And the men were like, oh, we don't have to listen to her. We're just going to build it the easiest, the fastest way that we can. She came back. She immediately knew they had not followed her direction. And she made them take it all down and build it again. And she was a very tough woman, as she had to be during the time, to get done what she needed to get done. Now, specifically for El Tovar, the outside was designed to look like a Swiss hunting lodge, which is really interesting. It definitely sticks out here on the canyon. The reason that it was designed this way was to invoke the idea of European luxury out in the West, and to encourage people to travel here in the United States instead of, say, for example, going over to Switzerland to get that Swiss lodge experience. It's interesting because nowadays, the National Park Service tends to try to have architecture that blends into the surroundings, be that with color or by drawing on traditional architecture of the area. So that building probably would not have been built today if those plans were presented. However, it has an incredible historic significance here at the canyon. And a lot of people will still log on right at midnight to try to get a reservation at that hotel best that they can.
So we have a wonderful question in the chat. Are there any Fred Harvey hotels or restaurants today?
Yes. So there are a few. There's there is a hotel in Winslow, Arizona, built by the Fred Harvey Company that's still up and running. And you can also eat there. Oh, and someone asked to repeat the name of the architect again, Mary Coulter, Coulter.
And the El Tovar is still there?
Yes.
Yes. Tom, you have a question?
Well, actually a comment, and Ranger Suzanne, I can't remember if you're at El Tovar or Bright Angel Lodge, but I wanted to say that my wife and I have been privileged to be at both lodges, and there are no more beautiful spots in the world, I would bet, than those locations. And we were very lucky because the lodge rooms do book up a year in advance. But at least when we were there many years ago, you could phone, and if there was a cancellation for the next day, and you could promise to be there the next day, you could book a room last minute. And that's how we did both of our visits there. Anyway, it just for the audience, if you ever have it, if you can possibly go to either of those lodges and visit the Grand Canyon, it is truly a spectacular place. How fortunate you are, Ranger Suzanne, to get to work in a place like that.
Yeah, that's fantastic that you had that privilege of staying at both. I've never stayed at either of them. I have my own apartment here, but I've gotten the chance to walk in and look around at both of them, and they're beautiful. So getting the chance to be there overnight would just be fantastic.
And if the weather's permitting and the ranger talk is on there, when we were there, there was an outside sort of little amphitheater with the ranger talking about the human and natural history of the canyon. And that is not to be missed.
I second that. I had the privilege of staying in the park at Grand Canyon at the El Tovar, and there was nothing like it. And you don't want to be a sleepwalker if you're staying there, because you are literally on the South Rim. You cross over the road, the walkway, and there you are. So sleepwalking is not a good thing, but it's a wonderful experience. I second.
And actually, a fun fact with the El Tovar Hotel, I just remembered, is that all of the hotel rooms are actually designed without a view of the canyon. You cannot see the canyon from them, to encourage people to go outside and just soak it in person instead of just being cooped up inside all day.
Oh, there's a hand up. Let's see, whose hand is that?
Alan.
Alan.
Yes, I have an El Tovar story that I want to share with the group. My wife and I took the kids to El Tovar in December for a weekend. And when we arrived, it was on a Friday evening. I'd driven up from Phoenix, and I had to go check into the hotel. So I came back out from checking into the hotel, and I asked my wife, "Where's Ben, my son?" And she said, "Oh, he wandered off over there." So I walked over there in the dark at night to try to locate my son. He was about 8 years old at the time. And I came upon him walking on the wall beside the rim in the ice and snow on the wall. And I almost had a heart attack on the spot. But I quietly walked over to where he was and grabbed him with both hands and yanked him off that wall. It was about, I don't know, 3 feet high and about 1.5 feet deep. And over the edge was like 500 feet down from El Tovar. But anyway, he survived. The next morning, I brought him down and showed him where he had been walking, and he couldn't believe it. I mean, he absolutely couldn't believe that he had survived. Anyway, that's my story for today.
And that wall that you mentioned, so that was built by that was built by the CCC, who'd been mentioned earlier. And there's actually a heart-shaped rock in that wall left by one of the men in the CCC, right in view of the dorms where the Harvey Girls stayed. And he placed a diamond rock there in the wall, or on the wall, and he proposed to her there. So a little a happy story to go along with that wall for you all.
I was always amazed when I saw parents taking pictures of little kids standing on that wall. And it's like, how do you know he's not going to take a step backwards? I mean, they were toddlers. And I used to just be amazed. But anyway. Okay, let me see. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I just want to see if we have any hands raised. And I don't, but I have a question. Oh, Tom, he's got his hand up. Okay.
Well, I just want to thank Alan for telling us that story. That's scary, but ended well. It's a cool story. And I have a story about the El Tovar Lodge. On sunrise on New Year's Day, that's where I asked my wife to marry me.
Oh.
It was bitter cold, and we were right on the rim, just a few yards, away from the lodge. And it's just so breathtaking that I got, carried away and asked her right then. Best decision I ever made, by the way.
Yes. Yes. How romantic. Oh my goodness. That's a lovely story. Anybody else want to share a story? Have a question? In the meantime, I'll ask you, I know Fred Harvey had a role in trying to preserve Native American culture, and that there are some aspects of that at the Grand Canyon, like the Hopi House. Could you comment on that a bit?
Yeah, so the Hopi House is another example of a building designed by Mary Coulter, that female architect, who also designed the interior of El Tovar. And her work was definitely really valuable. It was designed in the traditional way of the Hopi people, in the way that they would build their homes and their structures. And it actually was designed to function as a souvenir shop, which is how it still functions today. But it wasn't just, buying the same stuff you could get at Walmart. The souvenirs from there, at least today, are of a very high quality, made by local artists, local indigenous artists, who are able to profit off of the sales there. And personally, I'm not really at a point in my life where I'm going to be able to buy all of the jewelry in there, but I love going there and just looking at it, and I think of it as a museum of sorts, to see all of these different traditional ways that jewelry is made there. And it was built in 1903, so same time as El Tovar. An interesting fact is El Tovar and Hopi House are being constructed right around the same time. Hopi House finished construction first, and Mary Coulter was really proud of that because she kind of beat Fred Harvey, or beat the folks building El Tovar. Even though she was a woman, it was kind of like a look what I can do moment. Yeah, and there were also definitely other areas like Desert View, where she designed the Desert View Watchtower, which is built in traditional style as well. And she was just a great woman. I could talk about her all day. She even had secret smoking spots at all of her construction sites, so she could just like hang out, smoke a cigarette, and continue on her day, which I love. But yeah, great woman. Really interesting, really full of life, really tough skin, had to for the time.
I also heard he started, I don't know if it's a design style, or maybe it's the style that Coulter used to kind of sort of with suggestions of Native American style, or for the furnishings, or.
Well, I know that Mary Coulter, her style was really focused on making everything look like it grew right out of the landscape and almost fade away, not being able to be seen necessarily if you don't know what you're looking for. I can't necessarily speak to what Fred Harvey did, but her as an architect definitely had a big role in that, and she absolutely took inspiration from the local indigenous communities here.
See if we have any more questions. I don't see any hands up. I think that we have run out of questions. Anybody else have a question or comment?
I have a quick question, Sheila.
Yes, please.
I just wondered what the average tenure was of the Harvey Girls.
That's a good question. I don't know that answer. Do you know, Sheila?
Well, they had to sign a contract for 6 months at a time. At the end of 6 months, they got a vacation, and Fred Harvey paid for their travel. I think probably, I think the average was maybe they stayed a year or so. They had to commit to 6 months and not get married within that first 6-month period. I think it was the exception rather than the rule. Some of the women whose quotes here indicate that they stayed for many years. I don't think that was as common. I think they may have stayed more like a year. A lot of them got married being out there, or settled there.
Yeah, and it was hard work. They were held to that extremely high standard, but they also typically work 12-hour days, 6 days a week. So I could imagine not wanting to do that for 30 years, needing a break after a couple years of that.
Yeah, that's hard. They worked hard for sure. Here's a wonderful question in the chat. How many trains would stop on an average day?
Ooh,
I guess a question of where they're stopping because there were so many.
yeah, so there's
different
really
places.
only the one train depot that brings you pretty much to the edge of the canyon. I'm trying to remember how many trains would stop. Present day, I know we'll get 2 trains in the summer and spring break, once it gets into our busy season. But on the flip side, people have cars nowadays, so I'm not sure. But it was the primary mean of transportation. So, and it was also another thing worth noting is, especially in the early 1900s, mid 1900s, most of the visitors who were coming here were wealthy because it was a long journey to get there. The train wouldn't. Nowadays, you can do the 60 miles to Williams in about an hour. Took a lot longer back then, and then you couldn't just fly into Arizona. It was a whole journey to get there, so people had to be able to take off time from work to be able to do that. So it was primarily a wealthy visitorship that we were having. It was a $3.95 train ride from Flagstaff once the train was instated, so that did help. It did help so that it wasn't as expensive. It used to be an 8-hour stagecoach ride that was $15, which is quite a fair bit of money. Remember, the Harvey Girls were only making $17.50 a month. So it was brought down to $3.95 once the railway was put in, but that still was fairly expensive for the average American. So that's a long way of saying I don't know the answer to your question, Margaret.
Well, I think it probably varied depending on, what part of the country you were in and what time in history you were in. The tourism at the national parks was like a later development. In the beginning, it probably was, a lot of people going out to settle in the West. There was a big Oklahoma land rush, and a lot of people went on the train to go there and claim land. And there were a lot of business people and a lot of freight being shipped. So, in big cities, there probably were a lot of trains going through. The tourists who went to the national parks, I think that kind of came a little bit later and probably was not as heavily traveled as some of the larger cities. But
yeah,
definitely it was for wealthy people to, who had disposable income to be doing this.
Yeah, and it wasn't just people that the trains were transporting. They were the lifeline to the outside world for anyone living here as well. For example, up until 1926, all of the water here at the Grand Canyon was actually brought in by train, which is pretty crazy to think about. Nowadays, it's actually brought in over from the North Rim, and it goes down and around and then up, which is also a crazy concept to me. It is not easy to get water here when you're in the desert. You got to do what you got to do. But it does look like I have just about run out of time. I would love to stay and chat forever, but I do have another call coming up in a few minutes. But I wanted to thank you guys so much especially for sharing your stories, especially the one of the proposal on New Year's at sunrise. That was incredibly sweet. So thank you guys for sharing and for tuning in, and have a great day, guys.
Oh, we have a question. When did the Grand Canyon open?
So the Grand Canyon was established as a national park in 1919. European settlers have been coming out here for a few hundred years before that. But again, the Grand Canyon opening is a commonly misspoken phrase because people have been here forever and people have known about it since time immemorial. But Park Service Arrowhead has been since 1919.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to keep you. I know you're busy. This was wonderful. Ranger Suzanne, thank you so, so much. We really
You're
learned a
welcome.
tremendous amount from you, and this was so fabulous. And I love the photos, and the quotes are wonderful. Thank you so much. This was
You're welcome.
fantastic. We really appreciate it.
And I love the costume. It made me very happy. All right, bye guys.
Take care. Thank you. For those of you who would like to find out a little bit more about the Harvey Girls, I have a book to recommend. I don't know if you can see this. If not, I think I still have Ranger Suzanne spotlighted. So let me I'll just tell you the name so we don't unspotlight. The name of the book is Appetite for America, and it's by Stephen Fried. And it's wonderful because it tells Fred Harvey's story. It's really from his perspective from the beginning. He immigrated, he was a self-made man. He immigrated from England at age 17 by himself. He went to Chicago, failed at one business, but worked in many things having to do with the railroad before the Harvey Girls, worked selling tickets and selling freight. So the book has a chapter on the Harvey Girls, but it also tells the story of Fred Harvey and his vision. And it's a really good read. It's very engaging and interesting, and it's got great photos. There's something else in the chat. Let's just see. Oh, okay. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Judith, you have your hand up?
Yes, thanks for the tip about the book on Fred Harvey. That sounds pretty interesting. Do you know of a book that would talk a little bit about Mary Coulter?
Ooh,
Be
that's a good
something.
question. I'm sure there must be.
I'm sure there must be. I didn't know offhand you know of something.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm sure there must be.
Okay, sure.
Sorry.
Google it.
Yeah, that right. I'll Google it. That'll be the next step.
Okay, anybody else with a question, comment? Okay. Okie dokie. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I love the stories. Thank you all for joining us. I have a brief video, like a 7-minute thing, but I think you probably have gotten all of the information already from Ranger Suzanne that's in the video. So I'll spare you, but if anyone wants it, I can send you the link. And thank you very, very much for joining us. Look forward to seeing everybody soon. Everybody stay well and take care. Bye-bye, everyone.